Outlet Liquor is your place to buy a case. Stock up and save when you shop the lowest prices available every day at Outlet Liquor. You never have to wait for a sale. The more you buy, the more you save. Only at Outlet Liquor.
What's your outlet?
Welcome, everybody, to episode 140 of Two Goalies, One Mic, brought to you by Outlet Liquor, the place to buy a case on George Urban Boulevard. I am Duane Steinel, joined by Connor Hurley. Here, I think, in the second period of tonight's Sabres game against the Penguins, fourth preseason contest. I think it's still a scoreless game. Eric Comrie starting in net for Buffalo after Buffalo lost yesterday in the Kraft Hockeyville game to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Hurls, how are you?
Doing well. How you doing?
Not bad, man. Just on vacation right now and enjoying time off I got and getting a lot of golf in while I can.
Yeah, it's the time to do it.
Yep. So, but obviously, as we tease leading into this, we have on a special guest, returning guest, Chris Peters from Flo Hockey, joining the show with us. Chris, as always, it's great to have you on. Exciting year here in Buffalo for us. I know you've done a lot of coverage on some of the young talent that we drafted this year, that we have drafted in the past couple years. So always excited to get your insight on our roster.
Yeah, hey, great to be with you guys again. Always fun to do it. And yeah, I mean, obviously very exciting time for Buffalo in a lot of different ways, for sure.
Exactly. And, as I stated before we brought you in, they're in the middle of their about halfway into their fourth preseason game against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, in which is feeling pretty much as close to an NHL lineup as you can get. I know Crosby, Malkin, Carlson, Tink, they're all playing. I believe who is their start? Is it
Chris and Jerry?
Yeah, is Jerry in net?
Yeah.
Yep, Jerry's in net. Eric Comrie net for Buffalo, a guy who is hoping to fight his way back into the backup position for the Sabres. So, but again, like Sabres are obviously getting a good look at a lot of the young talent that they've drafted over the past 3 to 4 seasons. And Chris, again, you've done some extensive coverage on it, and I obviously get right into it. One of the players that Buffalo is extremely excited about is, in fact, Zach Benson. I know that you guys have over at Flo Hockey have done some extensive coverage on him. He dropped quite a bit. And I wouldn't say quite a bit, but he went further down the draft board, and I don't think Buffalo expected him to fall to them. And just honestly, just your overall opinion of him leading into that draft, what you've seen so far in his first NHL training camp, obviously the Prospects Challenge, overall, just your observation so far.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch his preseason games, but beyond that, just knowing the player and knowing what he's done over the years, I think he's, I don't think he's going to make the team. I just think that the Sabres have built, a roster that I think they should feel comfortable with, and they have enough guys that should go through. Maybe he'll, get the 9 games or something. I just don't see how he's going to fit in on a team that has aspirations of contending for a playoff spot this year. That said, I mean, he's a highly competitive individual. He plays the game hard. Doesn't have the great size, but he's tenacious. I think the skating ability is another thing that's it's not quite NHL caliber yet, but I don't think it's, well, I shouldn't say that. He can skate at an NHL level. It's just a matter of, continuing to get stronger, continuing to get, more used to the NHL pace. But the thing about him is, I think that he's going to be able to go back to a junior club where he's going to have a lot of success, where, I don't think he's outgrown junior hockey, even though he had such an exceptional season last year. So I don't think it's really a developmental concern at this point. I think that there's plenty to be excited about with him. And yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a lot to like about him. I think that even whether he makes the team or not this year, this is a team that should be having very difficult roster decisions at this point. I just have a hard time seeing him kind of fitting in there.
I've seen a lot of people rank him as the Sabres' top prospect, and that's saying something given the prospect pool the Sabres have created over the past few years. It's one of the deepest pipelines in the league by many accounts. Would you rank him currently at the top of the Sabres prospect pool? And if so, what does that say about him relative to the prospects the Sabres already have?
Yeah, I think in terms of future, in terms of his overall potential, in terms of what we think he'll be long term, I think yes, you could put him at the very top of the list. I think he's ahead of Savoy. I think he's ahead of guys. I mean, there's, to me, he's still a prospect. So I think Devin Levi might actually be the guy that's the number one. But you can make a really good argument for Zach Benson. I think Yuri Kulik as well is going to be a guy that is kind of figures into a scoring role, probably a middle six scorer at the NHL level. The question for Zach Benson is he going to be that like a middle six energy player that makes plays and can score, or is he going to be a top six, top of the lineup type? That's the bigger question. So, I think that the Sabres have a lot of good problems right now, and that they have so many young players, and it's hard to, obviously Savoy's injury kind of takes him out of the equation for making the roster at this point. But at the same time, you've got, so many guys that are stepping into big roles. I mean, the big question for me is ultimately, is Levi ready to be a full-time NHLer? I think that's the bigger question than whether or not Zach Benson's going to make it or if he's the top prospect. But I think, what it says about him is, one, that he's usually the new guys are going to get a little bit more runway. They have more development time ahead of them. They have, more of an unknown quantity about them. Whereas, we know what Devin Levi is. We have a pretty good idea of what Matt Savoy is. We have a pretty good idea of what Yuri Kulik is. And a number of the other players, Rosen, all those guys. So we have a pretty good general idea. So we expect that the potential of a Zach Benson is going to kind of overtake and be the guy that should ultimately be if not the best NHL player of the group. It's probably between him and Levi.
Not stepping away from just his on ice play so far, but I don't know if you saw this, Hurls, and I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, Chris. It was a kind of release. The Sabres do those Sabres embedded videos.
Yeah,
he was a carny. Zach Benson was a carny. His family in Canada did a traveling amusement park, and he ran the games. He was a carny. Yeah,
I was is this some slang that I don't know about?
Hey, when you tweeted that last night, I'd never heard that term before.
You never heard of carnies before?
No.
People who work carnivals.
I'm from the city, though, so.
I don't know. Dude, you're from Buffalo, dude. You should know what a carny is.
I mean, I'm glad that I don't, to be honest.
Remember Joe Dirt in the movie Joe Dirt when he's hanging out by the Tilt-A-Whirl? That's a carny.
Yeah.
But he was a carny.
It was a really interesting video. I heard the story when he got drafted. But I think the coolest part about it was that given that he was moving around so much in the summer, he went to a different hockey school every single week. He was learning so many different things from so many different people and so many different coaches and areas that it seemed like it not only built character for him, working in the mini donut stand at his parents' traveling carnival, but he also expanded his hockey game somehow. So yeah, it's a really unique anecdote, which is really cool.
Yeah, and what was it? He showed up to no, he didn't know. He didn't show up to the player interview at the combine. I think there was another meeting that the Sabres had before the combine interview where he had the full blown mullet. And they even said to him when he walked into his combine, he was like, "Oh, I see you got a haircut since last time. A little bit less party in the back, huh?" And that's when you found out, like, he was running like amusement parks. I thought it was funny, man. Like, this guy, not only this guy can he score and skate like the wind, he'll steal your girl by winning her the stuffed pig by popping four or five balloons with one dart. I just thought it was really amusing because you look at the kid at face value, it's like, no way a kid was ever like, he looks pretty clean cut, like not that he wasn't well brought up, clearly he was well brought up, but like would have never guessed he was carnival folk. But getting away from that, you did bring up another point I want to talk about is Devin Levi in his first year as an NHL starter. Me and Hurley have gone back and forth quite a bit about this, about what we expect his workload to be. I think he gets 50 or more games, personally. I think last year he started 6 in a row. He started the most important games of the season when there was a playoff spot on the line. The Sabres showed they had a ton of faith in him. And right now, I mean, they do have a 3-goalie rotation, as it looks like going into this season again, between Levi, UPL, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and Eric Comrie. But I just think that with the lack – I want to say there's a lack of faith in that backup position, but I think it's more of a testament how much more faith they have in Levi and how highly Kevin Adams has been speaking about him, how highly Don Granell has spoken about him. I think he gets 50 games.
I mean, that's an awful lot. And, especially for a guy that's coming out of college hockey, and for, the fact of the matter is, goalies that come into the NHL very rarely spend no time in the AHL, like very, like 0 time. So my thing is, especially with the 3-goalie rotation, especially since he's waiver exempt, I would not be shocked if he plays a fair amount of AHL games this year. I have a lot of faith in him too. I think he's an exceptional player. I think if it comes down and Comrie and UPL aren't getting the job done, I think that they're going to give him every opportunity to be the starter. Don't get me wrong. Like, they're going to give him an opportunity here. But I just think that is the one position where what they're trying to do with Levi just really hasn't been done. Not in a long time. Maybe even Ryan Miller played time in the AHL, and he was the best college goalie in the history of the game. And that's kind of where I'm like, oh, this will be interesting to see. Does he really do it? Because you have to take a couple of things into account. The college schedule is very different. The Canadian junior schedule is very different. He did miss an entire year, with the exception of playing in the World Juniors. So his development timeline is maybe a little bit out of whack in terms of what you'd normally see with a goalie. So what I would say is that while I think the Sabres are going to give him every opportunity to be that, I think that asking him or expecting him to play 50 or more games this year is asking probably too much of a goalie, where you don't want to give him too much too soon. If there's a person that can handle it, it's Devin Levi. I think the mentality that he plays with, the amount of work that he puts into his craft, the focus and the mentality that he has are all going to allow him to do this. But I think we just have not seen what the Sabres are trying to do with Levi in so long that I'm just not 100% sure I buy that he is the exception to that rule.
So if he does play AHL games, as you say, do you think that would be an indication that he does eventually, like, let's say he starts the home opener and he plays maybe 55, 65% of the first 20 games of the season. Do you think that means that he will eventually struggle to the point where they feel like they need to send him down to Rochester?
Well, I think usually when you're sending a goalie, the main reason of sending him down is if you can't give him enough minutes, and because you want him to play. But I think you'd rather have him learn and develop at the AHL level. So yeah, if they end up playing him as much as that at the beginning, I think the indication would be that he's the guy and he's just going to stay. But I think that you have to at least allow for the wiggle room to say, hey, we're going to try this goalie rotation as it is right now. We're going to see how long it goes. there aren't many successful teams in the history of the NHL that ran 3 goalies over the course of a season. And, you know, but there it can happen. I mean, we'll look at what the Golden Knights did last year. They had like 5 goalies that ended up playing for them last year. But the thing is that, you know, I just think that what they do, the decision that they make at the beginning of the season is the most important decision they're going to make all year on Devin Levi. If it's you are the guy, you have to at least be willing to accept that there are going to be growing pains and that he is either going to have to play through them or you're going to have to send him down to the AHL and you're going to have to make sure that he doesn't lose his confidence, that he doesn't lose any of that edge that he has, because I think he's an exceptional player. But I think that the decision that you make at the very beginning of the season, say, okay, we're going to give you a chance. And the beginning of the season, that doesn't just extend. That's not. I'm not just talking about like what they do for opening night. He could be the opening night starter. He could, you know, play his way, and maybe he is the exception to the rule. But I just think for Devin Levi, it's got to be decisive on everything about, you know, when we send him down, when or if we don't send him down, how much is he going to play? I think with a major regular season plus playoffs for a player that hasn't played more than, you know, 40 games in a season in the last couple of years, I think that you're asking for trouble when that happens. And as good as he is, and maybe he's a freak, maybe he is an absolute freak, but I like to side with history on these. And I think history says that he's going to need more time than he's currently being expected to have.
I tend to agree. I still think he probably gets 45 or more games. I'm more lean towards 50 because I think that just we've had Devin on the show in the past and just spoken to people who know him personally and how well he takes care of his body. You know, just he's just a mental maniac. I mean, and I've spoken to a few of his teammates and just like they don't exaggerate. The kid is always stretching. He doesn't put junk in his body. He's always he's always in the gym. He's on the ice constantly. So I think in terms of workload, I don't think that'll be an issue with him personally. And I also just from talking to him mentally, I just feel that like he's already got the maturity of an NHL veteran, not the experience, but the maturity of it, just the way he handles the game. We've seen it in post-game interviews when he got, you know, pumped for 6 goals against Detroit at the end of last season. You know, he said there's nothing wrong with adversity. He was smiling ear to ear. He's like, we got the win. That's all that matters. And I don't really care what my stats say. We got the win. And, you know, face a little adversity. You got to find a way to bounce back when faced with it. Hurls, your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that 40 games should be the benchmark. Given everything Chris said and everything we've heard about this type of goalie at this juncture of his career, I do think the Sabres are on a little bit of a slippery slope here. They improved the defense, I would say, a good amount, bringing in Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson. And I think the team defense is going to improve. I think every projection about even the Sabres defense from an offensive perspective, like I read an article the other day, like Tage Thompson was one of the worst defensive forwards in hockey last season. Of course, he made up for it with his offensive output, and he's projected to do that exact same last season. But I think the Sabres do need to figure out a little bit better how to defend in their own end, and that's not just the defense and puck watching. That's also wingers and centers doing their part as well. And relying on a kid who's 21 years old, who's played 7 NHL games, to just carry the workload in a season that it does feel like playoffs or bust is the expectation from not just the fan base, but from also the organization. I think it's a very slippery slope if Levi does struggle early on, because you saw Luukkonen last night and you saw his inconsistency last season. I don't think anyone's really confident in him. His ceiling can be high. He can have good games here and there, but I think his consistency is an issue. And we still don't really know what we have with Comrie. So it is tough. Of course, like we all believe in Levi, and it would be amazing if he does turn out to be that freak. But I personally believe the best option would be hopefully bringing in somebody else, a guy like John Gibson, maybe even Hellebuck if it turns out there's a better option to bring him over. I really do believe that would be a better plan for this team to confidently make the playoffs and maybe even make an impact.
I just don't think it'd be Hellebuck.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be tough, obviously. But
in an extension, I hear he wants close to like Bobrovsky money, which I don't think Kevin Adams would do. Gibson, I mean, depends on the trade and how much Anaheim you willing to retain. But anyways, but I digress. Onto some other players in the Sabre system right now. Matthew Savoy and Ryan Johnson. Ryan Johnson, who is impressed in his first couple games in the preseason. We've seen the hands. Not really known for his offensive output. I think, Sabres more of expect a more him to bring more stability to the blue line and the defensive zone, but he's shown some offensive flashes here in the preseason. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty excited about him. Savoy getting injured early on, so we haven't seen much of him in the preseason, but he did get back on the ice today, I believe. What are your expectations for those two players? Of Chris, just your thoughts.
Yeah, I think for Savoy, the injury, it just kind of changes the expectations and timeline for him. What he ends up doing with his it's tough. I think it's a little tough to say, exactly what's going to happen with the injury, depending on how quickly he's able to come back and stuff like that. But, he wasn't a guy that I was penciling into the NHL lineup anyway, not this year, but certainly, in the future. Obviously, two great WHL seasons in the last two seasons that he's had. You got a little bit of a taste of the AHL last year. I think that's a guy that's, could benefit from that, when the time comes. And, I think for him, it's just you have to put him back on the shelf for a little bit and let him, get back to normal after the injury. I don't think it'll be something that's a long-term thing or anything like that, but just, giving him an opportunity to get better. As far as Ryan Johnson goes, he's a really interesting player in a number of fronts. I mean, we know how long it took to get the deal done too, in terms of was he going to sign? Was he not? Or did the Sabres even want to sign him? There was a lot of different speculation out there in terms of what ultimately was going to happen. In the end, that cost him time with, didn't get any NHL games last year, did not get any AHL games last year. So I think he's going to be an all-year AHL player. I think he's probably going to have to learn the ropes. I think Seth Appert is one of the better developmental coaches in the entire American Hockey League. I think he'll benefit from his coaching. And I also think that he's going to have to be patient because obviously, as we know, the Sabres have a logjam of defense now. And he's going to have to find a way to figure into that. I really think, the athletic tools that he has and the hockey sense defensively that he has, I think are very strong and should allow him to compete. I think he's probably a 5-6 defenseman long term. I don't think he's a top 4 guy. I don't think the offense is ever going to come in a way that is meaningful at the NHL level. I don't think he's going to be on your power play. He's probably going to be a penalty killer, more of a shutdown guy who can move pucks well enough. I like the player. I don't like him as a first round prospect. I think that's always hard to, these guys get these numbers put on them, and then that comes with a certain level of expectation. And if he went one pick later, we wouldn't have the same level of expectation on him. So I think that's part of the other thing is that, last year when the Sabres were considering it, I was like, I think he's probably worth a second round. Like the reason that you keep him is he worth any more than a late second round pick? And I think, yes, he is. And now it's going to be on him to take that next step. With a late second round pick, that's a guy you still expect to play in the NHL. And that's what he ultimately should be expected to do. I think you've got guys like Clifton and Johnson as stopgaps, guys that won't necessarily be part of the long-term solution there. Ryan Johnson won't have as many roadblocks in front of him. And then, he should be able to get through. But I think both of those players are guys that, you should be excited about. They should make an impact down the road to varying degrees. But I think it'll now, you're going to have to wait to see him, I think.
And another thing, too, when you talk about high expectations, is he was part of that Ryan O'Reilly deal. And until Tage Thompson, just after Granato made the move for him to put him at center, we thought that was one of the worst deals in hockey history. And it turns out, with him winning the the Conn Smythe and the Cup the very next year, we thought maybe Ryan Johnson would be the single bright spot of that deal until Tage really turned his career around under Granato. So, again, with I guess I'm saying that Tage might have taken that burden away from the expectation on Johnson, again with him being a end of the first round pick, but like I said, with the Ryan O'Reilly deal being attached to that, there were even more expectations, at least from us here in Buffalo, on him.
Yeah, I would say manage those expectations.
Yeah.
One other defensive prospect, not a lot of Sabres fans, I think, know, at least the ones that aren't diving too deep into it, but I think Nikita Novikov is a pretty interesting prospect. And I guess just from your perspective, having probably watched him a lot more than the average fan, what have you seen from him, and what do you project he could be in the NHL potentially?
Yeah, so to be perfectly honest, I haven't watched him a lot. I think last year I spent a lot more time on the drafted prospects, but in terms of what I've seen over the years from Novikov, and I think what we're seeing from Russian players in general, out of these different like the amount that they get to play. It's great that he's in North America. I think that there's obviously a lot of things to like about him. I didn't watch a ton of Russian hockey last year, with the exception of watching, a fair amount of Matvei Michkov and guys like that, Simashev and players like that. I think you look at him and, obviously the size stands out to you. He's got good mobility. I think that he's going to have to learn the North American game. That's the next step for him. Didn't necessarily produce a lot in the KHL. That's not really a concern for a player at his age. We don't expect, under 20 defensemen in the KHL just don't produce. They don't. But when you have a guy at his size, his mobility, his overall skill set, you see the ceiling. And so this season is going to be very educational, not just for him, but I think for the Sabres as well, to figure out what kind of role can he play. Again, now we're talking about another left shot defenseman, as if the Sabres don't have enough of those guys. This is kind of an embarrassment of riches, which is a great thing to have. But the other thing too that can happen with Russian players as well is if they don't adjust well, and it's kind of getting a little, they're not getting what they want, there's not a lot of time before they want to go back to Russia. So that's the other thing you kind of have to consider with players like Novikov, who, is leaving the KHL for this NHL dream. As those players tend to find out, it's still pretty difficult. And the AHL is a tough league to play in. And, I personally think it's a better league than the KHL. There's more skill in the KHL maybe, but I think the AHL is the second best league in the world. And that's a big jump for a player for him to, to get in there. So I'd say cautious optimism because of the toolkit, because of, the way that the minutes that he played last year in Russia, like significant time when he went back to the U20 ranks, and then, modest time when he was in the KHL. So he's got a lot of development time left. So be patient, and we'll just have to wait and see exactly what he'll ultimately become.
You mentioned his name earlier. Another player that we're pretty excited about in Buffalo, Yuri Kulik, a guy that has really shown have one of the more heavier shots possibly in the organization. You look at players like Victor Olofsson, who, sat again, we talk about Levi starting the most important games of the season last year, whereas Olofsson, a guy known to put pucks in the back of the net, was a healthy scratch at the end of last season in those same games. Yuri Kulik has been, expressed to be a replacement if Buffalo decides to move on from Victor Olofsson, because he has a very similar shot, but also is much better. I'm not gonna say much better, but better on all three areas of the ice. Just your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I like the player a lot. I think he's the closest outside of Levi, probably the closest to NHL ready at this point. You look at what he did at the World Juniors last year. You look at what he did in Rochester. You look at what he did in the playoffs last year. Those are all significant indicators that the goal scoring is going to translate to the next level. I think that he's one of those guys where you might want to give him, several opportunities at the NHL roster in an elevated role. You have to surround him with the right talent. Yuri Kulik is a finisher more than he is a driver. He can drive play. We've seen him do it. He can make, but you want him as a scoring winger, and that usually needs to come with a playmaking center. He could play center. I think he's a wing in the NHL personally. But I think that's where we're going to have to wait and see, basically how the roster plays out. If he goes back to the AHL, you just expect that dominance to continue. And as it does, it becomes harder and harder to leave a guy like that in the AHL. I think that he's probably going to be, I would be shocked if he doesn't finish the season with the Sabres. I think he'll be on the roster in the critical times of the year when they're chasing down playoff spots and maybe into the playoffs. He's gotten that experience of last year in the Calder Cup playoffs where he, his game showed no drop off at all. This is a player that I have watched quite a bit, a player that I've spent more time on. And I think his shooting and scoring ability are NHL caliber. And when you have that as one of your primary traits, teams are going to find a way to get you into the lineup. So as a potential long-term replacement to Olofsson, I think that's probable, in terms of, I think that there's an upside there that suggests that Kulik is on that path. But man, I just think that this is a player that the Sabres should be really excited about. I think, as good as Benson is, he's still a little ways away, whereas Kulik, I think, is on the cusp. And so, you get a little bit more instant gratification with him as a prospect.
Short term, do you think it's possible, given the injury to Jack Quinn for at least probably the first half of the season? Is it within the realm of possibility he could contribute in the first half of the season for the Sabres, or do you think he starts in Rochester and potentially comes up with another injury?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately going to determine, these last couple of roster spots probably be determined by camp and how players play and what the makeup of the team looks like. I think it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that he makes an impact and enough of a way to get himself onto the roster. I think it just kind of depends on what the team ultimately looks like, who's playing well, and then, what kind of spots they have in him and where they can maximize his ability. Because I think the one thing you don't want to do with a goal scorer is take him out of his rhythm. And you want him to continue to kind of develop in terms of, hey, this is a guy that if you're going to put him on the NHL roster, he's got to play. You can't sit him in the press box. You can't, and if you don't trust him enough to play him, then he's got to be in the AHL. And I think that's really where it comes down. So I think he's on the cusp. I think it's not unreasonable to expect that he could challenge for a spot. I thought at the end of last season that he was really going to challenge for a spot. And then you just kind of look at the Sabres roster and say, wow, where exactly, where are the holes at this point up front? Because you do have to remember, these still are young players. This is a guy that's still going to be eligible for the World Juniors this year. So, it's not like he's like a fully finished product. So I think you take your time but boy, I think he's got all the tools to be a contributor pretty quickly.
And again, with such a young lineup for Buffalo, we spoke about it before we came live on air. What would your expectations be for this young Sabres lineup? Obviously, you've covered a lot of these players very recently. Dylan Cousins, Jack Quinn, JJ Paterka. We just talked about Yuri Kulik and Zach Benson. Again, we don't think Benson. Honestly, we don't think Benson will get to the lineup, but we would expect that he would go back to junior. Devin Levi in nets. And just the Owen Power, Darlene. Just so much this youth movement for Buffalo. Like, what would your expectations be for them? Is it playoffs? With how close they got last year. Do you think they should? The expectation should always be win the Stanley Cup, but realistically, do they break the playoff drought this year?
I think they do. I do. I think that this is the year to get back in there. I think they're starting to remind me a little bit more of kind of the Lightning teams of years past, where we're also seeing AHL success mirrored. Like I think the Americans are going to be a really good team in the AHL next year, compete for a Calder Cup. Before a lot of those guys on the Lightning won a Stanley Cup, they won a Calder Cup with Norfolk. I think that this is an organization that's on the cusp. I love, I think the top six is a legitimate NHL top six. Yes, it's, a little bit younger, but maybe not as much at the top line. But, when you have Dylan Cousins anchoring a second line, or you have, Casey Middlestat, does he continue to, pile it up like he did last year in a way that, really finally we got to see, his game. I think depth at forward, could it be better? Maybe, could you have a little bit more scoring towards the bottom of your lineup? But I mean, like, let's say Olofsson or Kulik is on that third line, there's some legitimate scoring pop there. And then the big question mark for me is goaltending. Is it Devin Levi's year? Is he going to be, I just, looking at it, I think last year was the first year he played more than 40 games in a season when you factor in the games that he played with the Sabres. And you also have to keep in mind that the college schedule is mostly weekends. In the Hockey East, they do have some midweek games, but it's not like consistently that way. I don't think you can look at this team and say, oh, if there is a Stanley Cup winning goalie on there right now at this point, maybe Devin Levi is that long term. But I think that, this is a team that's going to have to go through some adversity once you get into the playoffs. It's been a long battle to get there. Getting there would be a huge accomplishment. Would they win a round? It's harder to say that, because I think that as time goes on, experience is going to matter. And this is just a team that just doesn't have a lot of playoff experience at its disposal. So I would say that, this should be a year where your expectation is playoffs, and then beyond that, everything else is kind of icing on the cake. But there is a lot to like about the Sabres team. I think it's one of the more exciting young cores in the league. When you have two number one picks on the blue line in Dahlin and Power, I mean, think about just years and years and years of those two guys. You can go through an entire game and one of them will always be on the ice by the time they're really at their peak. So that's a pretty good thing to have. So I'm excited to see what the Sabres do. I hope it's the year, just for the sake of the good people of Buffalo and for yourselves, because it's been a long ride, and it has been a lot of pain, and it's been a lot of, stops and starts on rebuilds. And sometimes you got to rebuild at the right time, and sometimes you got to, get lucky. And Tage Thompson is a late bloomer, and, you get a Dylan Cousins fall your way in the draft, and, you get different guys that are there. You get 2 first overall picks, and it just so happens that you have 2 elite defensemen there with Dahlin and Power. I mean, those are the breaks that you need. And now we have to see if they're going to get the breaking goaltending as well, because that's really, the linchpin of any contending team, is to have quality goaltending or good enough goaltending. And I guess we're going to find out soon if that's the case in Buffalo.
You mentioned the young Tampa Bay teams. I guess that reminds me to bring up the news that came out today of Vasilevsky being out potentially the first 2 months of the season. Boston's getting older. It doesn't look like they have the quality at the top of the lineup that they used to, especially at center. I think there are questions in Toronto, especially in the Atlantic Division. Like, how much do you think the Atlantic Division, which used to be arguably the best division in hockey, like, how much do you think that division, or the rest of the teams in the division potentially falling off this year, factors into the Sabres potentially breaking that playoff drought?
Yeah, I think it looks to me like it's Toronto and everybody else in this division. I think the Lightning will still be there. 2 months for Vasilevsky missing is awful, but it's not crippling for that group. I mean, I think that there's going to be some problems there. I think Boston is kind of going to take some steps back. We'll see if their goaltending holds up this year. Losing Bergeron and Krejci, it's just, you can't replace those guys. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge. I don't think Detroit's ready yet. I don't think that the Canadians are even close yet. So then that creates a lot of openings and opportunity. And that's why I really do think that the Sabres have a legitimate chance to be one of the, the top 3 teams in this division this year. And I think it's just going to, you can't win the Stanley Cup in October, but you certainly can lose it. You can lose your playoff spot in October and November. So getting off to a good start, building that optimism and letting things snowball is going to be critical, especially if you can pick up wins before the Bruins get into their rhythm, before the Lightning get into their rhythm. Try and stockpile points when you can. But yeah, I mean, I do think that that division itself is weak this year. And it's there for the taking. And so, when we talk about it, sometimes you do need that luck to play out and timing to work out. And I think that'll be the case for the Sabres this year.
I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. Before we let you go, I just have one more question. Well, it's like a two-part question.
Sure.
You mentioned Casey Middlestad's name earlier, a player that really has been criticized a lot in Buffalo in the past for, again, a first-round pick, never really, hitting even remotely meeting expectations. And in this past season, not just analytically, but the eye test, he was doing everything. He was scoring, he was a playmaker, great 5-on-5 player, killing penalties, can play on the power play, was versatile up and down the lineup. Just your thoughts and expectations for him. Is he going to pick up right where he left off? And Peyton Krebs, one of the two parts of the Jack Eichel deal. Alex Tuch, he's as advertised. He's been not just a phenomenal on-ice producer, but just a presence in the locker room. But Peyton Krebs, a guy who I think there should be some pretty, high expectations for this year, because again, another first-round pick, a lot of skill there, but hasn't really been able. And again, it's a tough top six to crack, but really hasn't been given the opportunity to really show his skill set even on the second power play unit.
Yeah, so I'll go to the Middlestat one first. I mean, last year was the best hockey I've seen him play since his draft year. And his draft year was exceptional. I thought he played I didn't love his freshman season at Minnesota. I was pretty surprised when he signed with Buffalo right after the one season there. I think it was a huge mistake for both him and the team. And that's another great example of too much too soon and why patience can really pay off. It's taken Casey this long to overcome some of those hurdles. It's also taken him a different mentality, and it's taken better players around him. And so I was even forgetting until I just looked at it now, because I was like, geez, it feels like he's been around forever. He's only 24, so these are supposed to be his prime years, 23, 24, 25, 26. These are supposed to be when he hits his stride. And it just so happens to coincide with the Sabres getting better. So that combination is why I think he's going to be really good. Peyton Krebs, same thing, 22 years old. He's a guy that's had to deal with a number of injuries in his career. He had the Achilles injury right at the beginning in his draft year, which was like, what is that going to do for him? But he is such an intelligent player. He's versatile. He can fit a lot of different roles. He can play, and I don't think he's going to complain about the role that he gets. I think for him, the goal should be to be among the top 9 forwards on the team this year, to be a contributor, to be a scoring depth option. I think that his point total will go up this year. And I do think that he has the potential to be, a solid third line guy long term, if not, potentially moving to the top 6. Again, he's one of those guys where, we put the first round designation on a player, and if they don't become a star, it's viewed as a bust. Well, he was a mid-round first round pick, already on his second organization, part of a massive trade. So he's got all this additional pressure because of that. But I really do think that he's a legit player for this team. I think he's a legit NHL center, and I think that he'll be a long-term, good player for this team. I think even if he's on the wing, it doesn't matter if he's center or wing. I think he's going to find a role and define it however he has to, and be a contributor. So I think that's what makes me excited about the Sabres, is that we've just seen Casey Middlestat take a step. We've seen Peyton Krebs, we've seen Dahlin take, hit a big step forward. We've seen, I think, Owen Power's poised for a big step. Not all of that is like that. In the best case scenario, everyone takes a step. That probably isn't going to happen. but I think that the Sabres as a whole are in such a better place now than they were even last year, and that they have been in many years previous. And it's because there's that just abundance of young talent that's going to make an impact on this team.
Should they sign Patrick Kane?
I mean, honestly, yeah. Like, the thing is if you sign Patrick Kane at a discount, we know that he wasn't himself last year. We know that he was injured. I think he's still one of, he's probably the best American player in the history of the game. He'll be surpassed by either Matthews or Hughes, at this point. But I think that he is the opportunity that how much it would mean to him, I think, to play there, to be part of the solution there, would be great. I also think there is such a dearth of championship experience on this roster. Yes, it's nice to have Eric Johnson. It's nice to have guys that have done it. The one thing is if things are going well for Buffalo, I don't think you want to, depending on when Kane would even be ready, I think you'd like this group to stand on its own 2 feet. But if you have that opportunity to bring in a Kane, and if he wants to come there and if he wants to play there, you have to explore it. You're not doing your job if you're not, because this is a team that should have playoff expectations. And he's a player that has done it all in this league and can be, a guiding force for the rest of this team. I think he's matured a lot over the years. I think that he understands that time is short for him. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a thing that can really focus a player in, and to do it at home for him, I'm sure would mean a lot. So yeah, I mean, but it's a tough decision, right? And I think the price would have to be right, and you'd have to make sure the term was right and everything else. But it's intriguing, especially with the skill that he'd have to play with on this roster.
My question was sort of related to Middlestat and Krebs, but I guess who fills in for Quinn on that second line with Cousins and Peterka? And I guess that answer theoretically could be Patrick Kane. If the timing was right, of course, he might not be ready for a month or two. But is that Casey Middlestat to start the season? And how do you think he factors in with that line replacing Jack Quinn early on?
Yeah, I think it very well could be Casey. And I think if he's going to bring the skill level that we saw last year, if he's going to bring the grit and tenacity that were not part of his game, I mean, really just not, at any point, he really needed to find it. And I think he did. He had to get beat up a little bit to find it. But I think that he makes the most sense. I think that I've always felt that more comfortable with him as a winger than a center. Anyway, I think that he brings a lot of those things. I wouldn't, depending on how you feel about the center position, it wouldn't stun me if, you try Peyton Krebs up there as well, and give him that boost of playing with the Cousins, playing with the Peterka. Those guys could really feed off of each other. So, I think that the great thing is Don Granato has pushed a lot of the right buttons already. So whatever Donnie decides, I'm good with, because he's one of the smartest hockey people I've been around. And just to see the breath of fresh air that he's brought to this franchise as a head coach, and his just complete understanding of the market and of, the misery and everything else. I think he's the right guy for this time in this franchise, and they'll take a step with him this year. And I can't wait to see it.
Just an update, just because we were just talking about goaltending not too long ago. 1-1 game, Eric Comrie has stopped 4 breakaways in a row. So with the UPL performance, which I don't really put too much stock into preseason performances.
That's good.
It's they had an AHL lineup out there in front of UPL last night, and I mean, with the exception of the first goal, I'm not going to put 2 shorthanded breakaways on him. No way. But Comrie definitely is stepping up, given the opportunity here, hoping to possibly win that backup position. And again, that is as close to an NHL lineup as you're going to get from Pittsburgh in the preseason, without a doubt. So Eric Comrie, 4 breakaway stops in a tight 1-1 game so far in the preseason. Chris, Thank you. So, I mean, actually, Hurley, do you have anything else?
No, I'm good. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Chris. That was great.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Yeah, it's an exciting time, and I hope you guys enjoy this season. I think it'll be a fun one.
Yeah, I do. I'm excited for the 12th against the Rangers. I know Hurls will be in town from Cali. Excited to get together with him and have a beer and watch the Sabres play the Rangers, and hopefully lightning strikes twice for Devin Levi and in his NHL regular season home opener debut, I guess. Beats the Rangers once again. So that being said, this has been episode 140 of Two Goalies, One Mic. Chris from Flo Hockey, do you have anything you want to promote before we cut off here?
Just flowhockey.tv, Talking Hockey Sense podcast. Go check it out. We got a lot of great games coming up, on the platform, USHL, ECHL, college hockey. We got a lot of stuff coming up for the people out in Buffalo, Niagara, Canisius. They're on Flo Hockey as well. So, So I hope everybody checks that out and also enjoys this season. I really cannot wait to get it started.
Yep, and I hope we can get you on again at some point this year. Again, I think out of all of our guests out of 140 episodes, you've been our most recurring guest, and I always appreciate having you on, man. It's always a blast. So,
hey, my pleasure, guys. It's a lot of fun.
Chris Peters from Flo Hockey. I am Duane Steinell for Connor Hurley. This has been episode 140 of Two Goalies, One Mic, brought to you by Outlet Liquor, the place to buy a case on Georgia River Boulevard. Tell them the boys from Two Goalies, One Mic sent you, and they will take care of you for all your game night and Bills game day needs. This has been Two Goalies, One Mic signing off. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll talk to you later.